Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1888. The Ozark Mountains stood silent and imposing across the rugged landscapes of southern Missouri, their ancient peaks watching over the scattered homesteads and small mining settlements that dotted the valleys below. Far removed from the bustling cities of the East, these isolated communities existed in a world of their own, where the harsh realities of frontier life bred both extraordinary resilience and deeply guarded secrets. The case we're about to examine has been largely forgotten by mainstream history, buried in decaying county records, fragmented newspaper archives, and the fading memories of descendants who speak of it only in hushed tones. Yet, it remains one of the most psychologically disturbing incidents ever documented in the region. In the small mining settlement of Hollow Creek, nestled in a remote valley of the western Ozarks, a series of inexplicable events began to unfold in the bitter winter of 1888. The settlement consisted of no more than 20 weathered cabins, a general store with a small post office counter, and a modest mine office. The mine itself, a lead and zinc operation, had brought prospectors to this isolated valley a decade earlier. Most residents were transplants from Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia who had arrived during the mining boom, establishing a close-knit community where privacy was scarce and neighbors became as familiar as family. Hollow Creek was situated approximately 15 miles northwest of Chadwick, a slightly larger town established as a railroad stop in the early 1880s. The journey between these two settlements involved traversing treacherous mountain paths that became nearly impassable during winter months. This isolation would prove crucial to the disturbing events that followed. The first documented anomaly occurred on the morning of December 12, 1888. According to statements recorded by county officials months later, the residents of Hollow Creek awoke to find the doors of the general store standing open, swinging gently in the bitter wind. Inside, shelves had been meticulously organized, inventory neatly arranged, but no sign of the proprietor, Ephraim Cabot. What made this particularly unusual was that Cabot was known throughout the region as a man of precise habits and rigid routines. In the 11 years since establishing his store, he had never once failed to open precisely at 7:00 a.m., regardless of weather or personal circumstance. Several concerned residents entered Cabot's adjacent living quarters and discovered a scene that defied simple explanation. A half-eaten breakfast sat on the table, a fire still smoldered in the hearth, but there was no indication of struggle or forced entry. His heavy winter coat remained on its hook by the door. His boots stood empty beside it. Most peculiarly, a business ledger lay open on his desk, the final entry dated December 11, 1888. The last words written in his meticulous hand simply stated, "He waits in the hollow." This unsettling discovery prompted Zachariah Fulton, the mine operator and de facto leader of the community, to send a young man named Tobias Mercer to Chadwick to alert the authorities. Mercer set out on horseback, but returned 3 days later with troubling news. According to the accounts preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, Mercer claimed he had been unable to reach Chadwick due to an inexplicable fog that descended as he approached Morgan's Pass, the narrow mountain trail connecting the two settlements. He reported hearing voices echoing from every direction within the fog, causing him to become disoriented and his horse to panic. After hours of wandering, he found himself back at the outskirts of Hollow Creek, his clothes soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperatures. By this time, the community's concern had deepened considerably. 3 more residents had vanished without explanation. Winslow Thornton, a miner in his 50s known for his expertise in explosive handling; Adelaide Horton, a widow who lived on the settlement's edge and worked as a seamstress, and Isaiah Mercer, Tobias's uncle, who had gone to check on his nephew's delayed return. Like Cabot, they had disappeared without taking their coats or provisions, despite the bitter December cold that had already claimed the lives of inexperienced travelers in years past. A search party was hastily organized. Led by Fulton and comprising nearly all the remaining able-bodied men, they combed the surrounding forest and shallow caves that pockmarked the hillsides. County records indicate they found no trace of the missing persons, but what they did discover only deepened the mystery and planted the seeds of terror that would eventually consume the entire settlement. About 3 miles north of Hollow Creek, in a small clearing surrounded by ancient oak trees estimated to be several hundred years old, they came upon a circle of stones approximately 20 feet in diameter. The stones appeared to have been carefully placed rather than occurring naturally, though none of the searchers recalled seeing this arrangement during previous hunting expeditions in the area. At the center of this circle stood a crude wooden table, fashioned from raw timber. On this table lay 5 sets of clothing, neatly folded, enough for the 4 missing persons plus 1 additional set that belonged to no one the searchers could identify. Beneath each stack of clothing was a piece of paper containing identical writing, "The vessel emptied. The hollow waits." The handwriting, according to those familiar with the missing residents, matched none of theirs. Even more disturbing, according to a sworn statement by Fulton, later given to county officials, was that despite a recent snowfall, there were no footprints leading to or from the stone circle, as if the clothes and notes had materialized from the air itself. The men quickly gathered the clothing and notes, intending to return to Hollow Creek before nightfall, but as dusk approached, an unnatural darkness descended, far deeper than the usual winter evening. Lanterns provided little illumination, casting light only a few feet ahead. The party became separated in the darkness, their calls to one another seemingly swallowed by the dense woods. Fulton and 3 others, Harrison Pruitt, Elias Bentley, and Marcus Sutton, eventually made it back to the settlement. 7 others did not. According to Fulton's testimony, those who returned spoke of hearing whispers that seemed to come from within the trees themselves, voices that called them by name, and spoke of the hollow man and empty vessels waiting to be filled. Word of these events might have reached authorities sooner had the winter not been exceptionally severe. Heavy snowfall blocked the mountain passes completely, cutting Hollow Creek off from the outside world until early March 1889. By then, the situation had deteriorated beyond comprehension. When a postal rider finally reached the settlement on March 9, 1889, he found it seemingly abandoned. Doors stood open, meals remained half-eaten on tables, and personal belongings lay where they had been set down months before. The only sign of the residents was a series of journals found in Fulton's office detailing the gradual disappearance of the entire community. According to these journals, preserved now in the archives of the Missouri Historical Society, the remaining residents had begun to experience similar phenomena after the ill-fated search party. They described hearing voices calling from the woods at night and seeing shadowy figures standing motionless at the edge of the settlement. Most disturbing were the reports of residents witnessing their neighbors speaking in voices not their own, and standing motionless for hours, staring at nothing. The journals documented how, one by one, residents would simply walk into the forest at night, leaving behind all possessions. Those who attempted to stop them reported that the departing individuals felt unnaturally cold to the touch and seemed not to recognize their friends or family members. Some described looking into the eyes of these individuals and seeing nothing at all inside, as if looking through empty windows. Fulton's final entry, dated February 22, 1889, reads, "Only 5 of us remain now. The others have gone to the hollow, one by one. They walk into the woods at night, leaving everything behind." Harrison attempted to stop Elias from leaving last evening and reported that Elias's skin felt cold, like clay, and his eyes were empty. I barred my door last night, yet somehow found myself standing at the edge of the forest at dawn, with no memory of how I arrived there. I hear the hollow calling. It promises to fill the emptiness I've carried all these years. There is something in the deepest mine shaft, something ancient that was disturbed when we expanded the tunnel last autumn. It speaks to me now. It knows my name. It knows all our names. It has always known. The postal writer's report triggered an official investigation. County records show that Sheriff Wesley Hammond and 5 deputies arrived in Hollow Creek on March 15, 1889, to find the settlement exactly as the postal writer had described, utterly deserted, but showing no signs of violence or forced departure. The investigation might have ended there, attributed to some mass hysteria or the harsh winter, driving the community to attempt a desperate relocation that ended in tragedy. However, what the sheriff discovered in an abandoned mine shaft a half-mile from the settlement transformed a mysterious disappearance into something far more disturbing. According to Hammond's official report, dated March 18, 1889, the entrance to the mine shaft had been carefully concealed with brush and stones, arranged in a pattern similar to the stone circle found in the forest clearing. Inside, the walls had been covered with hundreds of crude drawings depicting human figures with hollow centers. More unsettling were the personal effects of the missing residents: watches, wedding rings, lockets, and other items that would never have been willingly abandoned, arranged in precise circles on the mine floor. At the rear of the shaft, Hammond reported finding a journal bound in what appeared to be human skin. The county coroner later confirmed this disturbing detail, noting that the binding material displayed clear evidence of human dermal and subcutaneous tissue. The journal's pages contained entries dating back to 1851 written in multiple hands. It described a being referred to only as the Hollow Man, an entity that allegedly inhabited the deepest caves of the Ozarks and could only exist in our world by wearing the empty vessels of those who welcomed the void. The journal entries became increasingly erratic and disjointed, but they consistently referenced a ritual that would allow this entity to cross permanently into our world if it could claim a certain number of vessels within a specific period. The final entry, written in what handwriting experts later identified as matching Fulton's, simply stated, "We are all hollow now. We have always been hollow." What happened to the residents of Hollow Creek? The official explanation, as recorded in county documents, attributed the disappearance to a combination of harsh weather, isolation, and the psychological strain of frontier life, leading to mass hysteria and probable death from exposure in the wilderness. Yet this explanation fails to account for several troubling details. How did nearly 40 people vanish without taking essential supplies? Why were personal items of significant value abandoned? What explained the identical handwriting on notes found by people who had never met? And perhaps most disturbing, why was Hollow Creek never resettled, despite the valuable mine located there? In the years following the incident, several attempts were made to reestablish the settlement or at least salvage equipment from the mine. Each attempt was abandoned after workers reported experiencing intense feelings of dread, hearing voices calling them by name, and seeing shadowy figures standing motionless among the trees. By 1895, the area had been officially condemned by the mining company, the trails leading to it deliberately obscured on maps. The entire incident might have been forgotten entirely, if not for a series of articles published in the Springfield Republican in 1907 by journalist Montgomery Pierce, who had discovered Hammond's reports while researching a book on Ozark mining communities. Pierce became fascinated by the case and spent months tracking down individuals connected to the investigation. Most refused to speak with him, but he did manage to interview Deputy Samuel Graves, one of the men who had accompanied Hammond to Hollow Creek in 1889. According to Pierce's notes, Graves was initially reluctant to discuss the case, stating only that some things are best left buried in the official record. However, after several meetings, Graves finally revealed a detail omitted from the official reports. According to Graves, when the investigation team was preparing to leave Hollow Creek, Hammond had instructed them to burn the settlement to the ground. As the flames consumed the abandoned cabins, Graves claimed they could hear what sounded like dozens of voices screaming from within the empty structures. Most disturbing of all, he insisted that as they rode away, they all witnessed the same inexplicable sight, every member of the missing community standing at the edge of the forest watching them leave. When Hammond ordered the men to return and investigate, the figures had vanished. Their faces were wrong somehow, Graves told Pierce. They looked like the people we were seeking, but their eyes, there was nothing behind them, nothing at all. And they stood too still, like they weren't breathing. The sheriff knew what we had seen wasn't natural. That's why he ordered us never to speak of it. The journal discovered in the mine shaft was supposedly transported to the county seat for further examination, but Pierce could find no record of its arrival or current whereabouts. When he pressed officials about this discrepancy, he was firmly advised to abandon his investigation. Pierce did not heed this warning. In November 1907, he informed his editor that he had discovered the possible location of the journal and was traveling to a private collection in St. Louis to examine it. He never arrived at his destination. His luggage was discovered abandoned in his hotel room, his notes on the Hollow Creek case missing. A brief investigation concluded he had likely met with foul play while carrying a substantial amount of cash for the purchase of the journal, though his money was found untouched in his room, safe. The case might have ended there, forgotten like so many frontier tragedies, except for a curious series of events that occurred in 1952. A historian from the University of Missouri, Dr. Evelyn Whitaker, came across Pierce's articles while researching Ozark mining communities for her doctoral dissertation. Intrigued by the story, she attempted to locate the original county records referenced by Pierce. To her surprise, she discovered that all official documentation of the Hollow Creek incident had been removed from county archives. When she inquired about this unusual gap in the records, she was informed that a fire in 1919 had destroyed numerous documents from that period. However, Whitaker's research revealed no record of such a fire in the county's history. Undeterred, she expanded her search, eventually locating the granddaughter of Deputy Samuel Graves, living in a nursing home in Springfield. The elderly woman, Meredith Collins, claimed to possess several items belonging to her grandfather, including a journal he had kept during his time as a deputy. According to Whitaker's notes, this journal contained several entries regarding the Hollow Creek investigation that aligned with Pierce's account of his interviews with Graves. More significantly, it included a detailed description of what Graves claimed to have witnessed on the final night of the investigation. "The sheriff ordered us not to speak of what we saw," Graves had written, "and I understand his reasoning. Who would believe that as we watched the settlement burn, we could see through the walls of the cabins as if they were made of glass? Who would accept that inside each structure we observed not fire, but what appeared to be great empty spaces that seemed to extend far beyond the physical dimensions of the buildings? And who would believe that in these impossible spaces we glimpsed something moving, something that had no form but was somehow watching us in return?" The final pages of Graves's journal described how, in the weeks following the investigation, each member of the team began experiencing similar phenomena, hearing voices calling from empty rooms, feeling watched by unseen eyes, and, most disturbing, finding themselves standing at the edges of forests with no memory of how they had arrived there. According to Collins, her grandfather had been so disturbed by these experiences that he resigned his position and moved his family to Springfield, where he refused to discuss the case for the remainder of his life. He had kept the journal locked in a box, instructing that it be burned upon his death, a request his daughter had ignored. Whitaker borrowed the journal for further study, but reported that upon returning to her hotel room that evening, she found it missing from her locked briefcase. Collins confirmed it was never returned to her. The elderly woman also shared one final detail that had been passed down through her family, that in the weeks before his death in 1917, her grandfather had begun to speak of seeing his former colleagues from the sheriff's department standing outside his window at night, their eyes empty, calling for him to join them. With her primary source lost, Whitaker's research stalled. Her dissertation ultimately focused on other mining communities, with only a brief footnote mentioning Hollow Creek as a settlement that had been abandoned under circumstances that remain unclear. However, her personal notes, discovered among her effects after her death in 1967, tell a different story. These notes detail how, after the disappearance of Graves's journal, Whitaker began experiencing unusual phenomena herself. She described waking at night to find herself standing before her bedroom window, staring out at the darkness without recollection of having left her bed. She reported hearing whispers coming from the walls of her apartment and finding pages of her research rearranged to form new messages. The hollow waits. Empty vessels. We have always been hollow. Most disturbing was her description of encountering a man on the university campus who she initially believed to be a colleague from the history department. According to her notes, mid-conversation she realized that this man's features were somehow wrong. His face resembling her colleague, but his expressions mechanical, his eyes reflecting nothing. When she abruptly excused herself and looked back moments later, the figure had vanished. Whitaker's final note, dated April 3, 1967, reads, "I can no longer distinguish between what is real and what is imagination. I dream of hollow spaces beneath the earth, of ancient things that wait in darkness. I feel my thoughts being replaced by something else, something that has waited centuries to return. I understand now what happened at Hollow Creek. They didn't disappear. They were emptied and filled with something else. And now it wants me too." 3 days after writing this entry, Whitaker was found dead in her home, the official cause listed as heart failure. Friends reported that in her final days, she had appeared withdrawn and disoriented, speaking of needing to return to the hollow and claiming that they were watching her constantly. The case might have faded completely from memory, except for a curious discovery made in 1968 during the construction of a Forestry Service road through what had once been Hollow Creek. Workers uncovered the foundation of what appeared to be the old mine office, and beneath it, a sealed metal box containing a single document, a map of the settlement with each building numbered, and a list of corresponding names, presumably the residents. What made this discovery particularly unsettling was that the map had been drawn on the back of a modern piece of paper, manufactured no earlier than the 1950s, and the handwriting matched samples of Zachariah Fulton's from 1889. Even more inexplicably, the list included the names of every member of Hammond's investigation team, as well as Montgomery Pierce, Dr. Evelyn Whitaker, and the members of the 1968 construction crew who would eventually discover the document. The discovery was quickly suppressed by Forestry Service officials who attributed it to a hoax perpetrated by locals familiar with the legend. The document was allegedly sent to a government laboratory for authentication, but, like the journal before it, disappeared from official records. The construction project was abruptly terminated, with official reports citing unstable ground conditions as the reason. However, internal memos later obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal a different story. These memos reference unusual psychological effects reported by work crew members and unexplained equipment failures and structural anomalies that defy conventional geological explanation. Perhaps most disturbing was a confidential report filed by the project foreman describing how several members of his crew had begun to exhibit strange behaviors after the discovery of the metal box. They reported hearing voices calling from the surrounding forest and experiencing gaps in memory, where they would find themselves standing at the edge of the woods with no recollection of how they had gotten there. Within 6 weeks of the discovery, 5 crew members had abruptly resigned, 2 had been hospitalized for acute psychological distress, and 1 had disappeared entirely while on a solitary hike near the former settlement site. The foreman's report concluded with a personal observation that would echo the accounts of previous investigators. There is something wrong with this place. The ground feels hollow beneath your feet, as if you're walking on a thin crust over an immense void. At night, we hear whispers from the trees, and sometimes, when you look into the darkness between the trunks, you can see eyes watching, not animal eyes, but human eyes that reflect no light at all. In 1972, a group of university students attempting to locate the site of Hollow Creek for a documentary film project reported encountering an elderly man on a hiking trail who offered to guide them. According to their account, the man led them deep into the forest, speaking knowledgeably about the history of the region until they reached a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks. There, the man suddenly stopped and turned to face them. The students later described feeling an immediate sense of dread, as if something was profoundly wrong with their guide. His face seemed to shift somehow. One student recalled in a written statement, "One moment he looked like an ordinary old man, and the next his features seemed to blur and hollow out, as if there was nothing behind them at all." When one of the students addressed him by name, the man allegedly replied, "That's not my name anymore. I have worn many names. Soon I will wear yours." The students fled, becoming separated in their panic. 4 of the 6 eventually found their way back to their vehicle. The remaining 2 were never found, despite an extensive search by local authorities. Those who returned reported experiencing nightmares in which they found themselves standing in a circle of stones, feeling gradually hollowed out from within, as something ancient and patient prepared to take residence inside them. One of the students who returned, Marcus Devlin, later became a respected professor of anthropology, specializing in the folklore of isolated communities. In his 1989 book, The Hollow Folk Disappearances and Displaced Identity in American Frontier Mythology, he devoted an entire chapter to the Hollow Creek incident, comparing it to similar legends from various cultures worldwide, stories of entities that could empty a person of their essence and wear their form. What makes the Hollow Creek case particularly compelling, Devlin wrote, is not merely the disappearance itself, but the pattern of consequences that has followed anyone who investigates too deeply. From Pierce to Whitaker to the Forestry Service workers, those who seek the truth about Hollow Creek often experience strikingly similar phenomena, hearing voices, experiencing memory gaps, feeling watched, and ultimately either vanishing or withdrawing from the investigation in a state of acute psychological distress. Devlin proposed that such consistent experiences across decades suggested something beyond mere legend or coincidence. Either we are dealing with an extraordinarily persistent form of psychological contagion, he wrote, or there is some objective reality behind the Hollow Creek phenomenon, something that continues to affect those who come into contact with it, regardless of their prior knowledge or expectations. John Devlin's academic colleagues largely dismissed his theories as pseudoscientific speculation. However, his research gained unexpected validation in 1992 when a caving expedition in the Ozarks discovered an extensive cavern system that appeared to correspond with the approximate location of Hollow Creek. The expedition's leader, Dr. Catherine Langford, reported that the system extended far deeper than any previously documented cave in the region, with tunnels that seemed to defy conventional geological formation patterns. Most unusually, certain chambers contained perfectly circular arrangements of stones similar to the one described in the Hollow Creek accounts. In one such chamber, deep below the surface, the expedition discovered a small collection of personal items, a pocket watch, a wedding band, a fountain pen, that subsequent analysis dated to the late 1880s. Next to these items lay a journal bound in deteriorated leather. Though most of its pages had rotted away, a few fragments remained legible, including one passage that read, "They come from beneath. They rise through the stone itself. They have no form until they take ours. They are the hollow ones, and they hunger for what fills us." The expedition intended to conduct a more thorough exploration of the system, but their plans were abandoned after 2 members disappeared during a preliminary mapping excursion. Despite an extensive search involving professional rescue teams, no trace of the missing cavers was ever found. Dr. Langford subsequently disbanded the expedition, sealed her findings, and refused all requests for interviews regarding the discovery. In her only public statement about the incident, given during a university lecture in 1994, she said simply, "There are places in this world that do not belong to us, places where the boundaries between what is and what should not be have worn thin. The Cavern System we discovered is such a place. I will not return there, and I strongly advise against anyone else attempting to do so." The Hollow Creek incident raises disturbing questions about the nature of reality and identity. What happened to those who vanished? Were they victims of some mass delusion, or did they encounter something genuinely outside our understanding of the natural world? And if the latter, what was this entity that could empty a person of their essence and wear their form like a garment? Psychologists have suggested that the extreme isolation of frontier communities like Hollow Creek could foster shared delusions, particularly during the harsh winter months when darkness dominated the days and social interaction was limited. The concept of prairie madness, or cabin fever, was well documented in pioneer literature, a form of acute anxiety and psychosis brought on by prolonged isolation and environmental monotony. Yet this explanation fails to account for the experiences of subsequent investigators, individuals separated by decades who reported strikingly similar phenomena when researching the case. From Montgomery Pierce in 1907 to the forestry workers in 1968, those who delved too deeply into the Hollow Creek mystery often experienced the same progression, hearing voices calling their names, discovering gaps in their memory, feeling watched by unseen eyes, and ultimately either vanishing entirely or withdrawing from the investigation in a state of acute psychological distress. Another theory proposed by paranormal researchers in the 1970s suggests that certain geographic locations might serve as thin places, areas where the boundary between our reality and others has worn thin, allowing entities from beyond to occasionally slip through. They point to the unusual geological features of the Ozarks, with their countless caves and underground waterways, as potentially conducive to such phenomena. This theory gained some credence in 1981 when a geological survey of the former Hollow Creek area revealed unusual subterranean features that defied conventional explanation. According to the survey report, ground-penetrating radar indicated what appeared to be an immense cavern system beneath the former settlement site, one far larger than any known cave structure in the region. More puzzling still, certain sections of this underground system seem to register as simultaneously present and absent, creating what one researcher described as readings consistent with a space that exists in a state of quantum superposition, both there and not there at the same time. The survey team intended to conduct further investigations, but funding was abruptly withdrawn following the unexplained disappearance of the lead researcher, Dr. Marcus Venn, who vanished from his hotel room the night after filing his preliminary report. His final noted observation, scrawled in the margin of his field journal, read, "It's not a cave system. It's a single entity, vast and patient, and it's awake now." A more prosaic explanation for the Hollow Creek disappearance was proposed by historian Dr. Lawrence Pritchard in his 2001 book, Forgotten Exoduses: Lost Communities of the American Frontier. Pritchard suggested that the residents of Hollow Creek might have abandoned their settlement due to economic factors rather than supernatural phenomena. He pointed to records indicating that the local mine's productivity had begun to decline in late 1888, potentially motivating the community to relocate to more promising territories. Frontier communities were notoriously transient, Pritchard wrote. When resources dwindled or conditions became untenable, entire settlements could vanish practically overnight, leaving behind only abandoned structures and forgotten names. The Hollow Creek case is likely nothing more than another example of this common phenomenon, subsequently embellished by local folklore into something more sinister. However, Pritchard's theory fails to explain several key elements of the Hollow Creek incident: the abandoned personal possessions of significant value, the strange writings found at the site, the consistently disturbing experiences of those who later investigated the case, and perhaps most notably, the fact that no record exists of the Hollow Creek residents relocating to any other settlement in the region. In 2003, an unusual artifact related to the Hollow Creek case surfaced in a private auction of historical memorabilia. The item, a silver pocket watch allegedly recovered from the mine shaft by one of Hammond's deputies, bore an inscription reading Z. Fulton, "Time is the hollow in which we all wait." Experts authenticated the watch as dating from the 1880s, and the engraving style matched examples from that period. More unsettling was what was discovered inside the watch when it was opened for examination. Between the case and movement lay a small folded paper containing a list of names, beginning with the known residents of Hollow Creek and continuing with individuals connected to subsequent investigations of the case, including Montgomery Pierce and Evelyn Whitaker. Most disturbing of all, the list concluded with the names of people still living at the time of the auction, including several academics who had recently published papers on the Hollow Creek incident. The watch was purchased by an anonymous collector, and its current whereabouts remain unknown. The seller, who had acquired it as part of an estate sale, could provide no information about its provenance beyond claiming it had been in the deceased's possession for at least 40 years. In 2007, documentary filmmaker Alexandra Reeves attempted to create a comprehensive account of the Hollow Creek incident, interviewing historians, folklorists, and descendants of those connected to the case. During her research, she reportedly discovered a pattern that had gone unnoticed by previous investigators, that several of the surnames of Hollow Creek residents appeared in records of other communities throughout the Ozarks in the decades following the disappearance. What's strange, Reeves noted in her production journal, is not just that these names appear, but the pattern of their appearance. In each case, individuals bearing these surnames would arrive in a community with no clear history or background, live there for precisely 7 years, and then vanish again, often followed by reports of other residents experiencing phenomena similar to those described in the Hollow Creek accounts: hearing voices, memory gaps, seeing figures at the edge of forests. Reeves theorized that whatever had happened at Hollow Creek might not have ended there, that it had perhaps spread, using the identities of the original victims as vessels to infiltrate other communities. Her documentary project was never completed. 3 months into production, Reeves abruptly abandoned the project, destroyed her research materials, and moved to Alaska, where she reportedly refuses all contact with former colleagues and family members. In a brief email sent to her producer before her departure, Reeves wrote only, "I understand now. They never left. They're still here, wearing familiar faces, waiting in the hollow places inside us all. I've seen them now, and they've seen me. I can't continue." The most recent development in the Hollow Creek case occurred in 2015, when hikers discovered an abandoned research camp in the approximate area of the former settlement. The camp appeared to have been hastily deserted, with equipment, supplies, and personal belongings left behind. Most notably, they found a laptop containing hundreds of audio files, recordings of what appeared to be interviews with elderly residents of various Ozark communities about local folklore and history. In many of these recordings, the interviewer, who identified himself only as Morris, repeatedly asked questions about Hollow Creek, hollow spaces, and entities that could wear human forms. Most respondents claimed no knowledge of such matters, but a few shared disturbing stories passed down through generations, tales of ancestors who had returned from the forest changed somehow, and of strangers who appeared in communities wearing the faces of people long dead. The final recording, dated just 3 days before the camp's discovery, contained only ambient forest sounds for several minutes, followed by a male voice whispering, "They're coming through now. The hollow has opened. They wear our faces, but they are not us. They have always been here, waiting in the spaces between, and now they're hungry again." Authorities were never able to identify Morris or determine what had happened to him. No missing persons reports matched the description of the camp's presumed occupant. The laptop and other evidence were cataloged and stored, but according to subsequent Freedom of Information Act requests, these items have since been listed as misplaced in official records. Is there any truth to the Hollow Creek incident, or has it merely evolved into regional folklore, embellished over generations? The deliberate removal of official records makes verification nearly impossible. What we know with certainty is that a settlement once existed, and that sometime during the winter of 1888-1889, its residents vanished without explanation. The rest, the stone circle, the mineshaft journal, the mysterious figures at the forest's edge, may be mere embellishments added over time to explain an otherwise mundane tragedy. Perhaps the residents simply abandoned their homes during a particularly harsh winter, attempting to reach larger settlements and perishing in the attempt. Yet one detail continues to trouble those who study this case. In the years following the incident, over a dozen unrelated individuals who researched the Hollow Creek disappearances, from Montgomery Pierce in 1907 to Forest Service investigators in 1969, themselves vanished or died under circumstances that official reports invariably described as accident or misadventure. The last known person to seriously investigate the case was historian Martin Schaefer, who in 1964 attempted to locate the site of Hollow Creek for a book on abandoned Ozark settlements. His final journal entry, found in his empty car parked on a logging road miles from the nearest town, reads simply, "I understand now. We have always been hollow." In 1985, a hiking party discovered an unusual stone formation in a remote area of the Ozarks, approximately where Hollow Creek would have been located. The formation consisted of 23 stones arranged in a perfect circle, with a crude wooden table at its center. On the table lay a collection of personal items, watches, rings, eyeglasses, wallets that investigation later revealed belonged to various individuals who had disappeared while hiking or camping in the region over the previous decades. Most disturbing of all was a journal found beneath these items, its pages filled with entries dating from 1889 to 1985, each written in a different hand, but containing the same message repeated over and over. The vessel emptied, the hollow waits. Forensic analysis confirmed that the final entry had been written in the hand of Martin Schaefer, 21 years after his disappearance. The journal and items were taken as evidence by local authorities, but disappeared from the evidence room 3 days later. The deputy responsible for cataloging these items subsequently resigned from the force, moved away from the region, and has refused all requests for interviews in the years since. In 2003, a digital audio recorder was found abandoned on a hiking trail near the suspected Hollow Creek site. The device contained a single recording, the voice of an unidentified man, initially calm but growing increasingly distressed as he described finding himself unable to leave the forest. "The trees keep bringing me back to the same clearing," the voice stated. "There's a circle of stones here, and I keep finding things that belong to me, things I lost years ago." The recording continues for nearly 40 minutes, documenting the man's growing panic as night falls, and he begins to hear voices calling from the darkness between the trees. "They know my name," he whispers at one point. "They're calling me by name, and I can see them now, standing just at the edge of my flashlight beam. They look like people, but something's wrong with their eyes. Something's wrong with their faces." The final minutes of the recording capture only the sound of labored breathing and footsteps as the man apparently moves through the forest. Then, abruptly, a long silence followed by a single sentence spoken in a voice that audio experts later confirmed was significantly different from the earlier portions of the recording. "We are hollow now. We have always been hollow." Attempts to identify the owner of the recorder proved unsuccessful. No missing persons reports matched the approximate date of the recording. The device itself was a common model sold in thousands of retail outlets across the country, with no registration or identifying information. In 2012, an anonymous writer claiming to be a descendant of one of the original Hollow Creek residents posted a series of documents online allegedly passed down through generations of his family. These included what appeared to be pages from Zachariah Fulton's missing journal, describing how the miners had discovered something ancient and patient in the deepest part of the mine in the summer of 1888. "It spoke to us from the darkness," one entry read, "not with words, but directly into our minds. It showed us the emptiness inside ourselves, the hollow spaces we all carry, and it promised to fill that emptiness with something greater, something eternal. Some of the men fled, but others listened. I listened. Now I hear its voice constantly calling from the depths, promising that I need never feel empty again." The documents were quickly removed, and the account used to post them was deleted. Attempts to trace the individual responsible have proven unsuccessful. The few researchers who viewed the documents before their removal reported experiencing unusual phenomena afterward, hearing whispers from empty rooms, finding themselves standing before mirrors or windows with no memory of how they got there, and most disturbing, occasionally glimpsing their own reflection with eyes that seemed somehow wrong, somehow empty. In 2016, a team from the University of Arkansas Department of Anthropology conducted a discrete investigation of several sites in the Ozarks associated with the Hollow Creek legend. Using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques, they discovered evidence of what appeared to be a small settlement matching the general description and location of Hollow Creek. More intriguingly, they detected what team leader Dr. Rebecca Morrison described as anomalous subterranean structures beneath the settlement site, spaces that did not conform to known geological formations or human constructions. These voids appear to extend far deeper than any natural cave system should, Morrison wrote in her preliminary report. More puzzling still, our equipment occasionally registered these spaces as simultaneously present and absent, creating readout patterns I've never encountered before. The team planned to conduct a more thorough investigation the following spring, but the project was abruptly canceled when their funding was withdrawn without explanation. In a private email later leaked to colleagues, Morrison expressed frustration with the university's decision, writing, "They're burying this because of what we found. Something is down there, something that doesn't match anything in the geological record. And whatever it is, certain parties clearly don't want it discovered." Morrison took a leave of absence from the university shortly thereafter, and reportedly spent several months conducting independent research in the Ozarks. She returned visibly changed, according to colleagues, withdrawn, paranoid, reluctant to discuss her findings. When pressed, she would only say, "Some things should remain buried. Some hollows should stay empty." She resigned her position in 2018 and moved to a remote cabin in northern Maine, where she reportedly refuses all contact with former colleagues and family members. Her research materials, left behind in her university office, were allegedly confiscated by unidentified federal agents, though no official record of such confiscation exists. Is the Hollow Creek incident merely a frontier tragedy transformed by time and retelling into supernatural horror? Or does it represent an encounter with something genuinely beyond our understanding, an ancient entity that waits in the deepest hollows of the Ozarks, patient and hungry, reaching out to fill the empty spaces within us? In 2018, forensic linguist Dr. Simon Hartwell conducted an analysis of all available written materials associated with the Hollow Creek case, from the original journal entries attributed to Zachariah Fulton to the online documents posted in 2012. His findings, published in the Journal of Linguistic Anomalies, revealed a disturbing pattern. Despite being allegedly written by different individuals across a span of over 120 years, Hartwell noted, these texts share specific linguistic markers that suggest a single author, or at least a single consciousness, behind them all. The syntax, the cadence, certain peculiar turns of phrase, they remain consistent across documents purportedly written by people who could never have had contact with one another. Hartwell proposed two possible explanations for this anomaly. Either the entire Hollow Creek narrative was an elaborate hoax perpetrated by a single individual or group over generations, or something had indeed affected multiple writers across time, imposing its own linguistic patterns on their writing, effectively speaking through them with a single voice. If we accept the latter possibility, Hartwell concluded, then we must consider a truly disturbing implication, that whatever force or entity lies behind the Hollow Creek incident has continued to influence individuals associated with the case for well over a century, essentially using them as vessels for its communication. Hartwell's paper was met with skepticism from the academic community, with many colleagues suggesting he had fallen victim to the very myth he was attempting to analyze. However, his research gained unexpected validation in 2019 when independent linguists using advanced AI analysis confirmed his core finding, that the texts associated with the case shared statistically improbable linguistic patterns, suggesting a single source. Shortly after publishing his paper, Hartwell himself reportedly began experiencing phenomena similar to those described by previous Hollow Creek investigators, hearing voices, memory gaps, finding himself standing before mirrors at night with no recollection of having left his bed. He took a leave of absence from his university position in early 2020 and has not returned to academic work since. In his last known communication, an email sent to a colleague at 3:17 a.m. on March 12, 2020, Hartwell wrote, "It's in the language itself. The words are hollow spaces it can inhabit. When we read them, speak them, write them, we invite it in. I should never have studied this. I should never have given it away inside." The most recent development in the Hollow Creek mystery came in 2022, when hikers in a remote area of the Ozarks discovered an abandoned campsite containing research equipment, personal belongings, and a laptop. The computer held hundreds of audio files, interviews with elderly residents of various Ozark communities about local folklore, particularly stories related to Hollow Creek and entities that could wear human forms. Most disturbing was a video file dated the day before the camp's discovery, showing a man who identified himself as Professor Morris Kaufman of Columbia University. In the recording, Kaufman appeared increasingly agitated as he described finding himself unable to leave the forest, repeatedly returning to the same clearing despite attempting to walk in different directions. "There's something wrong with this place," he said, his voice trembling. "The trees, they move when you're not looking at them. The paths change and I keep hearing voices calling my name from the darkness. The recording ends abruptly after Kaufman turns the camera to show a circle of stones in a forest clearing, at the center of which stands a crude wooden table. On the table lies a collection of personal items, including what appears to be Kaufman's own wallet and watch. As he zooms in on these items, a figure can be briefly glimpsed at the edge of the frame. A human silhouette standing motionless among the trees, its features indistinct in the gathering dusk. Authorities were never able to locate Kaufman or determine what had happened to him. No record exists of a Professor Morris Kaufman at Columbia University or any other academic institution in the United States. The laptop and other evidence were cataloged and stored by local law enforcement, but according to subsequent information requests, these items have since been listed as misplaced in official records. The Hollow Creek case remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the Ozarks, a story that blurs the boundaries between historical incident, regional folklore, and something perhaps more disturbing. Whether it represents a genuine encounter with forces beyond our understanding or merely the evolution of frontier tragedy into myth, it continues to captivate and unsettle those who study it. What we know with certainty is that a settlement once existed and that its residents vanished under circumstances that have never been adequately explained. We know that those who have investigated the case too deeply have often experienced similar phenomena, hearing voices, memory gaps, seeing figures at the edge of forests, regardless of their prior knowledge or expectations. And we know that many of these investigators have themselves vanished or withdrawn from society, leaving behind cryptic warnings about hollow spaces and entities that wear human forms. If you find yourself hiking the remote trails of the Ozarks and come upon a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks, where a circle of stones surrounds a crude wooden table, do not approach. If you hear voices calling your name from the darkness between the trees, do not answer. And if you encounter a solitary figure standing motionless at the forest's edge, do not look too closely at their face, for what wears that form may not be human at all, but something ancient and patient that waits in the hollow, hungry for what fills us. The hollow waits. It has always waited. And in the deepest part of yourself, in the empty spaces we all carry, something watches through your eyes, waiting for its chance to come home. Throughout the Missouri and Arkansas Ozarks, locals still speak in hushed tones of certain areas where hikers occasionally disappear, where electronic equipment fails without explanation, where people sometimes return from solo expeditions subtly changed, quieter, more withdrawn, their eyes somehow different. They warn of voices that call from the deep hollows, speaking your name in tones that sound unnervingly familiar, and they tell of solitary figures sometimes glimpsed at twilight, standing motionless at the edge of forests, watching with eyes that reflect nothing at all. Is there truth to these stories, or are they merely the evolution of frontier tragedy into regional myth? Perhaps we will never know for certain. Perhaps it is better that way. For in the deepest hollows of the Ozarks, in the spaces between what is and what should not be, something ancient and patient waits, hungry for what fills us, for the essence that makes us who we are. And if you should find yourself in those remote hills and hear a voice calling your name from the darkness between the trees, remember the fate of those who answered at Hollow Creek. Remember the investigators who sought the truth and found something far more disturbing. Remember that some hollows are best left empty, some mysteries best left unsolved. For in the Ozarks, not all who wander are lost, but some who are found are no longer themselves.